It's here. Batman, the video game. From Sunsoft. For the Nintendo Entertainment System. Let the battle begin.
Welcome back to Retro Rebound. In today's video, we're going back to Batman video games for a third time. Now, the numbers have been great. A lot of you are loving on these Batman games, and we have one more era of Batman games that we have not touched on, the retro Batman games. For those who aren't caught up, we talked about the early 2000s Batman games. Batman Vengeance, one of my favorites ever. Batman Rise of Sinzu. So many Batman games exist. And then we moved it forward a little bit to the Batman Arkham games. Some of the most goated superhero games to ever exist. Now, we roll back the clock to the early 90s and in some cases the late 80s to talk about the retro Batman games that well and truly, for many, started it all. Now, in all transparency, I was born in 1995. A lot of these games were before my time. However, I was a huge fan of the Angry Video Game Nerd growing up, so there were a lot of NES, SNES, SEGA Genesis games that I was introduced to through his content. One of them specifically being a Batman game. And I always idolized AVGN growing up. I always wanted to be like him, you know, this comedic touch, but also being enthusiastic about games. He's an icon in this retro space. So for me personally, I would try to play the games he would talk about, and I would do my own research on ROMs, on emulators, and eventually, at one point in time, one of my dad's co-workers when I was much younger gave us the NES, the SNES, the SEGA Genesis, and me being stupid, by the way, traded this stuff into GameStop eventually because I had no money, but I did fix these things up that were broken, and I played a lot of these games. So I thought, while I don't have the physical copies here with me, it'd be another great opportunity in celebration of the Batman to reflect on another fun era of video games. Maybe one that I'm not so personally connected to, but hopefully I can be a vector to all of you out there as you talk about your experiences with the retro Batman games. I know that was a long-winded intro, so thank you so much for bearing with me. If you're new here and you're into retro content, throwback content, nostalgia, any of that stuff, consider subscribing. With that, let's go in release order. There were plenty of old Batman games. Now, we're not going to hit every single, like the Game Boy Color ones and all that stuff, because a lot of these titles, if I'm totally honest, are throwaways. We're focusing on the family of systems being the NES, SNES, and SEGA Genesis. I want to talk about Sunsoft for a moment. So this, again, goes back to AVGN. I remember watching him play Batman on the NES and thinking to myself, oh boy, this does not look good. And watching him rage about it, I was like, I want to be like AVGN. So I'm playing it. And this game, man, I went back to it as I did for all these games for this video. This was a different era. We think Dark Souls and all that stuff is tough. You go back to those early 90s games where accessibility just did not matter, balancing almost did not matter, and this game is old. I'm talking you walk off to the wrong side of the screen and enemies will respawn immediately type old. That's just a common thing for these types of games with the memory that was allocated for them. Things would respawn constantly, so you were always in a forward progression. But this is where I wanted to begin it all. It's the one that I absolutely have the most connection to, the Batman Sunsoft game for NES. What a tough game. I mean, it's also fascinating just looking at the colors, right? How different art was back then, how much they, let's be honest, got wrong just by looking at it. You couldn't tell where you were on the map, but there's still a connection there. There's still this feeling of this was the beginning of it all. The Batman, right? And you think about how it's sort of been recycled now with the new movie, The Batman, and it started with this game, The Batman. Just so awesome. I also had a personal connection to this game because many years later, when I was in my late teens, I was at a comedy show, and I wish I had it with me. I'll take a picture so you can see it here in this video, but I don't have it here with me in person. I have a signed picture from Adam West and Burt Ward that I was at this comedy show, and it was around my birthday. My parents had bid on it at an auction and got it for me. And so just this old era of Batman, I do have this weird connection to it. Maybe not the one that some of you out there have of like, I grew up with it. This was my Batman, because we went through so many different eras of Batman, and we're in another new era of Batman, right? So there's been so many changes, and I just think it's always nice to reflect on this particular era. Let's move it forward a little bit. Same game, different console. One of my favorite things, as many of you all know, is when I grew up having, PS2, original Xbox, GameCube, it was awesome to buy the same game. Like, hey, maybe this one right here, you buy this game twice on the PS2, and then you buy the Game Boy version. And they're vastly different versions. This did apply to that era of consoles, the NES, SNES, SEGA Genesis, many times, where even looking at this, the same Batman game by Sunsoft would actually look completely different on the SEGA Genesis. The graphics, or rather art style, I should say, the combat, yes, it was still very much move forward, punch, and just doing that over and over and over again. Not much verticality, but it definitely looked better, had more of a vibe to it. And this was the difference with some of these game versions that I just wanted to bring people back to. It's just looking at it, playing it, I was like, damn, this is the same team, not even like a year later, making the same game, I put in quotes. Kind of crazy. But gaming was different back then. You could turn these games around in 11 months and sell them. Obviously now, it's completely different, where like 4 years is considered quick. It's crazy. I want to move it up to Batman Returns now.
It's Super NES action like you've never seen before, simulating all the adventure and intrigue of the hit blockbuster movie. Step into the silver screen as you fight for justice through 7 cruel and unusual stages. Batman Returns brings superhero stature and silver screen simulation to the Super NES, only from Konami.
So Konami made Batman games, which is so cool, because when you hear some of the music for these Konami Batman games, you can hear like the JRPG music that's in there that kind of doesn't fit, but it's incredible. So I fire up Batman Returns because I was like, my memory's very loose on this one. This was 1992. I'm like, my memory's loose on this one. Which one was this? You see this long title crawl in the beginning, these very awkward cutscenes, and I'm thinking to myself, oh, brother, here we go. This was an era, wasn't it? Again, we look at where games are now. Even games with pixel art, right? You look at something like Triangle Strategy, which we recently reviewed, and then you look at the cutscenes of this game with the PNGs of Bruce Wayne and Catwoman just overlaying out of nowhere, and the Penguin, and them layering on top of each other. It's not pretty, but there's a charm to it. It's like, wow, this was considered like high stakes for its time. Like, whoa, look what they're doing here. So I'm having low expectations because, again, I don't remember what Batman Returns is. I fire it up and I go, wait, this was like the beat 'em up. This one kicked so much butt. I played this one on the SNES. The art style right away. I love how Batman looks. I love that we're in a snow level, Christmas decorations. There's something about Batman and Christmas that shouldn't work together, but it really does. And I think of like Arkham Origins as well. Just, again, as I said in my Arkham video, criminally underrated. Please check that out if you haven't already. But this game, it reminded me of one of my favorite beat-em-ups of all time. Probably my favorite beat-em-up of all time, actually. TMNT Turtles in Time. Like, that art style. So beautiful, so colorful, so rich, so much personality. And then you put this JRPG sound and music, and then it's a Batman game where he's doing things like picking up dudes, clicking heads together, choke slamming them, throwing them against walls. There was a sense of power in this game that made you feel truly like Batman, right? You look at what was happening in Batman by Sunsoft, and you're kind of just walking along the same line, and you're getting beat up a lot. You really don't feel like a superhero. This was the moment I felt like a superhero when I was doing these throwbacks. I was like, yeah, I'm really taking on like 18 different thugs at once. They're doing a variety of enemies. This was a lot of fun. My expectations were pretty low for this one, but man, was it fantastic. Really, really like this one. What I probably like more, again, I think a lot of this, as much of this content is very nostalgia driven, was in 1994, there was the SNES release of The Adventures of Batman and Robin.
It's time to take out the trash. Fight through incredible 3D animation against Gotham City's vilest villains in SEGA's Adventures of Batman and Robin video game.
Which was based off of, at least art style wise, the Batman animated series. Probably the most iconic rendition of Batman when it came to animation, just the color scheme, all that stuff. You all know how I feel about Batman Vengeance and how they captured the animated series so well in that game, on a vibe, on how creepy it was. And maybe while Batman and Robin wasn't creepy, the art style that this show pioneered will always stick with me. The red sky, the way Joker looks, the way Batman looks, it is forever cemented as like the Batman when I was growing up. This was still a year before I was alive, right? So again, these are all very much beyond Maddie. These are still things that like I'm not even a thought at this process. I'm just living. I don't even want to make the joke, but you know what I'm talking about. So I'm just chilling. These games are releasing. This is another beat 'em up, but this one had a lot more of a focus on equipment, which I really liked. This also had the ability, much like Batman Returns, going up and down the screen, kind of a feeling of 3 dimensions as you were fighting along here. I also dug the cutscene style here, the text boxes. Again, this was Konami. That's the crazy part. Konami was putting these ones out. And there was, again, that kind of Japanese flair with the text boxes, the portraits, the animation. Something about it was very different. So I very much appreciate these games, and I wonder if growing up, as I was experimenting with all of these games, if that's what kind of led me down the path of loving a Japanese style of game development. I've always liked it more than Western games when I really look at it. There are very few Western games I love, but the Japanese style games are so meticulous, such an attention to detail. They age well. They favor an art style that I'm a very big fan of. But yeah, Adventures of Batman and Robin, arguably the best retro Batman game for many. Highly replayable, very much that TMNT, Turtles in Time energy. We love that stuff. This is where Batman gets a little ugly. So, 1995 rolls around. Maddie enters the Earth, as does Batman Forever.
He can run, there's no escape. He can hide, that's his fate. He can bite with all his might and never win. When good battles evil, the real game begins.
Oh, wow. So this one, what a uncanny valley kind of experience. And we're talking about a 1995 video game. This one with the animations, like something out of Mortal Kombat, the kicking being like, it was kind of cool, the combat system, right? You had your high kicks, your mid kicks, your low kicks. Same thing with your punches. You could punch low, punch high. There was crouching. But this was that era of games where some of them just couldn't get out of their own way with the controls, right? With a beat 'em up, it was easy. You're going in one direction. Technically, you could go up and down, but you're not in a 3D space. You're going in one direction, and you're hitting one button to attack, typically. And it's mindless fun, but it works, and it's got co-op elements. You like that stuff, right? Batman Forever still takes that 2D route as you had to back then, but the animations, the character models look really weird, like this, I don't know what, this demonic monstrosity. And the fighting didn't feel good. It felt kind of clippy, like you were just constantly resetting the animation. I didn't like this one as much. I know some people do like it, but Batman Forever did not click with me. And it really sat in when I was trying to use my bat grapple to just, shoot my way out. I couldn't get out of the ceiling. What I do like about Batman Forever, though, is much like a certain movie, it's focused on the Riddler. And I could see when I was playing this game, I remembered as a kid how cool it was to play this game and not really be super familiar with guides and the internet availability of them, right? At my time, strategy guides, Prima Games was still a thing. Also, there it was. I have it right here for at some time down the line if we want to do a video. Brady Games did a lot of strategy guides. This came with my copy of Battle Network 6. But these were the things you'd go to the store and you would pick up. And there were still things like Game Facts Online. You could do all that stuff. But I'll be the first to admit I wasn't super wise at navigating the internet at the age of, I don't know, like 9 or whatever I was. I don't know when AVGN was making these videos. But certainly not affluent in the ways of the internet. So I could see how with Batman Forever, the ability to hunt down these Riddler clues that are very tricky, are constantly leading you down a path, was actually really cool. And if you were discovering that for yourself, that was cool. That was cool. Obviously, nowadays, going back to it, you're like, what does this even mean? And you have to do very obscure things or fight through controls that did not feel good. Yeah, it could definitely wrestle with itself. There is some charm there. But for me, this was the one that I don't remember as fondly. The last one is one that I can't believe I forgot to mention when we were talking about the early 2000 Batman's game. So I apologize. I was trying to focus on the late 80s and 90s here, but I did want to make sure I covered as much ground as possible with significant Batman releases. And for those who are thinking I'm missing the Batman Beyond games, fret not. We talked about those in our Remembering the Batman video games video, so that is there. We don't need to talk about the Batman Beyond video games. Return of the Joker is it's terrible. I wanted to talk about another kind of Batman game, Gotham City Racer, PlayStation 1 game, right? And it's funny, this was coming out around the same time as Batman Vengeance, which is a game I love. This was another Ubisoft effort. It's amazing to think of all the companies that Batman's been passed around, right? We know many people in my generation know them for through Rocksteady, right? But then you look at Ubisoft, Konami, like there were some serious hands on the games that came out of this IP. Gotham City Racer, it's a game. You drive around. It's funny, like chasing down Two-Face and shooting missiles at him. It didn't feel great, but it was one of the few 3D experiences where you could just kind of enjoy riding around as the Batman and the Batmobile. One of my critiques of, say, Batman Vengeance was when you would try to turn a corner in the Batmobile or even the Batplane, you would use your grapple and shoot it out the window and bend around a curve because I guess the Batmobile or the Batplane didn't have any handling to their vehicles. So this game let you drive around, feel like Batman on the move, but not feel like Batman himself. Obviously, this was a time where games had to have a very specific focus. You couldn't do what GTA did, like run around in an open world, use your guns, and drive your car. You had to pick one, especially in 2001. You definitely had to pick one. And so they picked driving, and they called it Racer, even though a lot of missions didn't really involve racing. You were just driving around the world trying to stop crime, and there was something kind of cool about that. But it was a game that you could see it had an idea there that if it was a part of a more grand Batman experience, it would have been cool. But as a game on its own, you get me. So there were some great retro Batman games. Like I thought the Sunsoft one I did have some true nostalgia for, but Adventures of Batman and Robin, Batman Returns, some really great beat 'em ups in there. And it was great going back to these because again, it speaks to really what started everything on YouTube. AVGN for me. Like I am an OG AVGN fan. I love his stuff. I love how much he pioneered this space and made video game content fun to watch. I remember that was such a crazy concept that I wouldn't watch TV anymore. I would watch AVGN on like Screw Attack and all that stuff. And I would try to emulate him. Fortunately, I've developed into my own person, but I'm here largely because of him, and these games I'm only familiar of because of his video on the Sunsoft NES Batman game, which then led me down the rabbit hole of all these retro games. And I'll always remember like fixing up the SEGA Genesis, the SNES. It was really cool. So I had a lot of fun going back to this. I know I don't have as much, I'd say, enthusiasm on the level of holding the game in my hand and be like, here's what I did with this one, because all of them were experienced through like ROMs when I was a very young age. But hopefully you all understand that I was doing the best I could. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, what do you think of these retro Batman games? Please do fire away. I'm looking forward to seeing your thoughts. Other than that, I'll see all of you in the next Retro Rebound. Peace out.